CLO5.2, computing the break-even point. We'll do the algebraic method, the unit contribution margin method, and some net income questions. Okay, when we're talking about a business, there are three different ways we can use to find the break-even point. The first is the algebraic method, the second is the unit contribution margin method, and the third is just the graph method, which I'll start with and go over very quickly. So from previous lessons, hopefully you remember we've seen that we can put the revenue on a graph. Revenue is the amount collected from sales. When you sell nothing, then you didn't collect any revenue, and the more you sell, the more your revenue increases. So the revenue graph always looks like that. Then we have a cost graph, which always starts at the fixed cost, which would be rent and salaries, and it also goes up the more you sell. Okay, so any kind of business graph is going to look like this, and the key thing is where the revenue is exactly equal to the cost, that is called the break-even point. Now there's a few ways to describe the break-even point. You could drop a line down and see the value on the x-axis. Sometimes it's written as the break-even point on the x-axis. I like to write it as the break-even quantity. That's the quantity of items you need to sell in order to break even. If you sell less than those items, if you sell, let's say it was 50 items, if you end up selling less than 50 items, that means you made a loss. If you end up selling more than that, that would be called profit. The break-even point is where there's not profit or loss, but you entirely broke even. You didn't lose money, you did not make money. So we could describe that by the quantity you need to sell, or we can look on the y-axis, and sometimes that's called the break-even point on the y-axis. I like to call it the break-even amount in dirhams, which means how much money do I need to find in my cash register that I collected from sales in order that I can entirely pay my bills. I won't have any loss, I won't have any profit. Now those are the two different ways of describing the break-even point. There's even a third way. It's called the break-even point as a percent of capacity. So the full capacity is always the end of the graph. And so if we see, well, what percentage of our total amount do we need to sell in order to break even? So I like to call this the break-even point as a percent of capacity. So that's how we find it from the graph. Now, often you're not given a graph, and we need to use the algebra method. So here are the steps of the algebra method. I'll just write them out, and in the next slide we'll do an example. So step 1, you're going to find the total revenue equation. Step 2, you're going to find the total cost equation. Step 3, you are going to set those two equations equal, total revenue equal to total cost, and then you are going to solve for the quantity, and that would be the break-even quantity. Okay? Now, a lot of people don't like to do algebra, and it turns out that there is a quicker method. It's called the margin method, or the unit contribution margin method. Now, if you remember, just as a reminder, the margin, sometimes it's called markup. It's the difference between the selling price and the variable cost. So the margin method is really just a formula method that says you can find the break-even quantity by just doing the fixed cost divided by the margin. But in this case, so we have it all in one equation, you can find the break-even quantity by just dividing the fixed cost divided over the selling price minus the variable cost. Either of these methods will get you to the break-even quantity. Then after that point, if you want to find the break-even amount in dirhams, then you just take the selling price times the break-even quantity you just found. And if you want to find the break-even point as a percent of the capacity, you just do the break-even quantity you found found, divided by the capacity. That will give you a decimal. If you want to turn it into a percent, you multiply by 100. Okay, let's do an example. Like all problems, we should read it and label what we are reading. So we've got a company that makes shoes, and the variable cost for each pair of shoes is 90 dirhams. That means the raw materials to make the shoes, or maybe we buy those shoes from a factory at the cost of 90 dirhams. We also have fixed costs of 3,900. Those would be the rent and the salaries. And the selling price is 150 dirhams per pair of shoes. It says the capacity is 100 shoes. Again, let's draw a picture to see what's happening. You've got your revenue equation always starts at 0 and goes up. Your cost equation always starts at the fixed cost and goes up at a little bit smaller slope. And then we have the break-even point we're trying to find. So according to the algebra method, the very first step is we need to find the total revenue equation. The total revenue is selling price times quantity. So in this case, the total revenue is 150 Q. Second step is we need to find the total cost equation. The formula for the total cost is variable cost times quantity plus fixed cost. And so we've got the total cost equation. In this case is 90Q plus 3,900. Okay, third step is we set the total revenue equation equal to the total cost equation, and we will solve using algebra. So 150Q equals 90Q plus 3,900. So we want to get the Q's together on the left side of the equation. So we'll subtract 90Q from both sides. We'll end up with 60Q equals 3,900. We want to isolate Q all alone, so we will divide both sides by 60, and we will get the quantity equals 65. And it's not just the quantity in this case, this is that special point, the break-even quantity. So we just found that if we sell 65 items, then we will not have a loss and we will not have a profit. We will break even. And then if we want to find the break-even point in dirhams, what we will do as our last step, we will take, for the break-even point in dirhams, you just take the selling price times the break-even quantity that you just found. So let's do that. The selling price is 150. The break-even quantity we just found is 65. So we get a break-even amount in dirhams of 9,750 dirhams. Now, both of these answers are describing the same break-even point, but just in another way. So we can say if we collect 9,750 dirhams in our cash register from sales, then we break even. Or if we sell 65 items, we break even. If we have less than that, it would be considered a loss. If we have more than that, it would be considered profit. Now there's one more type of break even. We don't have this on the instructions, but we'll do it just the same. If you want to find the break even point as a percent of capacity, all you must do is the break even quantity you just found divided by the capacity. So in this particular case, the break-even quantity was 65. The capacity was 150, which simplifies to be 0.433. So that would be 43.3% is the break-even point as a percent of capacity. That means looking along this axis, the capacity was 150. If we sell 43% of our stuff, then we will break even, or Ahmed's company will break even. Okay, now many of us don't like algebra, so I'm going to show you another method, the UCM, Unit Contribution Margin Method. I just call it the margin method for short. And it's really just a formula method for directly finding the break-even quantity. So again, like everything, we're going to first label all of our numbers before we get started. So it says the fixed cost for a bakery is $49,000. That would be the rent, the salaries. Cost per unit of production of loaf of bread, the unit variable cost. So the cost per item is only 30 fils, and the selling price, it's bread, it's cheap, is only 1 dirham per loaf of bread. Okay, and it says nothing about capacity, so we can't answer that question about as percent of capacity. But just to remember what we're doing, just visually, you've always got revenue starting at 0. You've got your cost starting at the fixed cost, and these two graphs will intersect at a point. The place it intersects is called the break-even point. So the first thing we're going to try to find is the break-even quantity, the amount that we need to sell in order to break even. Now, the margin method is simpler, in my opinion, than the algebra method, because we can directly go to a formula where we know that the break-even quantity is just the fixed cost divided by the margin. But even more specifically, that's just the fixed cost divided by the selling price minus the variable cost. So let's plug that in, and we see the break-even quantity is 49,000 divided by 1.00 minus 0.30, and we will get a break-even quantity of 70,000 loaves of bread. Okay, so what that means is in this business, in this bread business, they must sell at least 70,000 loaves of bread. If they sell less than that, this would be called a loss. If they sell more than that, then they will make a profit. And again, if we want, there is one other kind of, well, there's two others, but there's one other kind of break-even measurement that we can do right now, is the break-even amount in dirhams. So just like in the algebra method, if you want to find the break-even amount in dirhams, you just do the selling price times the break-even quantity that you just found. And so in this case, it's quite an easy calculation. 1 dirham times 70,000 loaves of bread. So the break-even amount in dirhams in this case is 70,000 dirhams. So when we look at our cash register at the end of the day, if there's less than 70,000 dirhams that we've collected, that would be loss. If there's more than 70,000 dirhams that we collected, that would be profit. Now, unfortunately, since they did not tell us the capacity, we can't figure out the break-even point as a percent of capacity in this example, but we'll do it on the next slide. Okay, let's look at this example. Now, like usual, I like to start by underlining all the numbers and labeling them so we know what we have. The variable cost of making a chair is 70. The selling price of the chair is 90. The fixed costs, that would be rent and salaries, are 8,200, and the capacity is 600 chairs. Okay, we're going to try both the algebra method and the margin method to find the different break-even points. So we'll start with part A, the algebra method. The algebra method says, first thing you're going to do is find the total revenue equation, which the total revenue equation is selling price times quantity, so it's 90Q. Second thing you're going to do is find the total cost equation. Total cost is variable cost times quantity plus the fixed cost. Okay, now our third step is we are going to set total revenue equal to total cost. So we say 90Q equals 70Q plus 8,200. Now we do algebra to solve. We will subtract 70Q from both sides. We will collect all the Q's on the left-hand side, and we end up getting 20Q equals 8,200. Now we want to isolate the Q, so we will divide both sides by 20, and we will get that the quantity, which now is going to be called the break-even quantity, is going to be 410 items. So if I sell less than 410 items, it would be a loss. If I sell more, it would be profit. That's the algebra method. Okay, now we'll do what, in my opinion, is the easier method. The margin method just has one step. You just directly say the break-even quantity is the fixed cost divided by the margin, which in this case, while margin is always selling price minus variable cost. So we plug and chug the fixed cost, 8,200, divided by 90 minus 70. When you do that calculation, guess what? You'll get the same answer, that the break-even quantity is 410 items. Well, now when we answer part B, it's asking for the break-even point in dirhams. Now, whether we did the algebra method or the margin method, you find the break-even amount in dirhams the same way. You take the selling price times the break-even quantity that you just found. So in this case, we've got a selling price of 90. The break-even quantity is 410. And so we will get the break-even amount in dirhams is 36,900 dirhams. That means if we collect 36,900 in our calculator, in our cash register, then we break even. If we collect less than that, then we have loss. If we collect more than that, we have profit. And lastly, they're asking about the break-even point as a percent of capacity. And either using the algebra or the margin method, you do it the same. You take the break-even quantity that we found and we divide by capacity. So we will do that, and we get the break-even quantity was 410, the capacity was 600. As a decimal, that would be 0.683. You can multiply 100 to get it to be a percent, and we get 68.3%. That means if I sell less than 68.3% of my stuff, then it's a loss. If I sell more than 68.3% of my stuff, then it is profit. Okay, now we're going to do some questions they might ask you about net income. As you remember, the most basic equation for net income is that the net income, which describes profit, loss, or break even, you calculate that from doing the total revenue minus the total cost. Now, if you substituted the equations for total revenue and the equations for total cost and rearranged it to look prettier, you would get this equation: selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost. And this equation is in your formula sheet. No need to memorize it, but we will use this when they ask us a lot of questions about the net income. So again, like usual, before I do anything, I'm just going to label every number in the question. It says the variable cost to make an item is 700. The selling price is 900. The fixed cost, which would be rent and salaries, things like that, be 5,000. And the capacity is 50 items. And we want to know, for part A, we want to know the net income. We don't know the net income if the sales volume is 20% of capacity. Now, this might be difficult for some to realize what they're saying. So let's just think about this for a moment. Remember, capacity is a measurement on the x-axis, which is measuring quantity. So if they're telling you that something is 20% of the capacity, what they're telling you is quantity. The quantity is 20% of the capacity. So in math, 20% is 0.20. The word of means times. Capacity is 50. So what they're really saying by saying the sales is 20% of capacity, they're saying you sold 10 items. So now we have quantity, variable cost, selling price, fixed cost. That should be enough to use this equation to find the net income. So the net income in this case is going to be, well, I'll rewrite the equation again, selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost, and plugging all the numbers in, 900 minus 700, the quantity is 10, the fixed cost is 5,000, so we will get a net income of minus 3,000 dirhams, and whenever your net income is minus, we call that a loss. Okay, now part B is saying how many items, Q items, how many items should be sold in order to generate 30,000 dirhams in income. So we want to find Q, but they're telling us that the net income is 30,000. Okay, so let's use that same equation. Net income is selling price minus variable cost. Quantity is what we're going to be trying to find minus fixed cost. So let's plug in all those numbers. 30,000 is the net income we want. The selling price was 900. The variable cost was 700. Quantity is what we want to find. The fixed cost is 5,000. Let's simplify a little bit, get rid of those brackets. 900 minus 700 is 200Q minus 5,000. Now we will just do some simple algebra to isolate Q. First thing I'll do is add 5,000 to both sides. And we will get that 200Q equals 35,000. And then to isolate Q, to solve for Q, we will divide both sides by 200. And we will get that our quantity we must sell in order to make that big of a profit is 175 items. Now, if you might notice from the question, they said our capacity is only 50. So in order to make that big profit of 30,000, we'll have to increase our capacity and sell 175 items. Okay, let's do one more question that should put all these ideas together and review of 5.2. So here's a company, and they make medical masks. So again, like always, let's label every number that's given so we'll know what to do. So first thing I see is that the variable cost is 350. That would be the cost of buying it from the factory, or the cost of getting the paper and the elastic and those kinds of things for the mask. And it says fixed costs, so that's things that don't change every month. So that's rent, salaries. The fixed costs for this company are 2,275. Selling price for these masks is 10 dirhams each, and the capacity, that means the most they could possibly sell, is 1,000. So part A asks for the total revenue equation, which we know is selling price times quantity. So the total revenue equation in this case is 10Q. Okay, part B is saying, well, what's the total cost equation? We know it's the variable cost times the quantity plus the fixed cost. And so we will plug in those numbers. The variable cost is 350 Q. The fixed cost is 2275. Okay, the break-even point in units. Now we could do it the algebra method by setting those two equations equal, but I prefer the break-even point in units, also called the break-even quantity, just to use the margin method, which is fixed cost divided by the margin, fixed cost divided by selling price over variable cost. And so in this case, we will get 2275 divided by 10 minus 3.50, and we get a break-even quantity of 350 masks. That means if they sell less than 350 masks, they will lose money in their company. If they sell more, they will make a profit in their company. Okay, and now the break-even point in dirhams. So I right? Break-even point in dirhams, that's the selling price times the break-even quantity that we just found. And so we will plug that in, 10 times the break-even quantity of 350, the break-even amount in dirhams. This is the amount of money I need to collect in my cash register in order to pay all my bills, is 3,500 dirhams. If I collect less than that, I lose money. If I collect more than that, I make money. Now the last question is a net income question. It's saying how many masks should they sell? So they're asking for the quantity and they want the net income to be 1625. So we will use this net income equation, selling price minus variable cost times quantity minus fixed cost, in order to solve for our quantity. So I'll plug everything in. The net income is 1625. The selling price is 10. The variable cost is 350. The quantity is what we're trying to find. The fixed cost was 2275. So first thing I'll do is simplify what's inside that bracket, and we get 6.50Q minus 2275. Then I'm trying to isolate the Q. So I will add 2275 to both sides. Okay. And we will get 3,900 on the left equals 650Q on the right. Again, I want to isolate Q, solve for Q. So I'll divide both sides by 650, in which case I will get a final quantity of 600 masks. So if I want to make that profit of 1,625, then I better sell 600 masks. Okay, that was the lesson 5.2.